feel like I'm a little hot. Do you feel like I'm in a cave? That's better. Yeah, thank you. I want to be heard clearly. If I don't want to be like we're in an arena or anything. Uh, I don't think that's it. Well, the problem is I'm in front of it. It's like behind me. I feel like we do something slightly different. But I'm not crazy. It's not just me. It did feel a little different visually in here. Maybe. These don't get any brighter, do they? I don't think so. We'll survive. No, I think we're okay. This is good. This is good enough. We'll survive. Okay. We'll just leave. We'll do the best we can together. Okay. It's just the light. It's just the lighting. It's the lighting. I did get a haircut, and I trimmed my beard and my hair today. This afternoon, I saw you this morning. Did I see you this morning? Yeah, I just did this. Yeah, you have a keen eye. Look at you. An eye for detail. All right, more important things than my hair. If you still have not, there is still time to fill out a committee and service group volunteer form. If you need one, there are a bunch of them back there in the foyer on the table. But get those back to us by Sunday is the deadline that we need those back from y'all. Secondly, if you have not heard yet, and we can talk more about it when we get to prayer time especially, but the memorial service for Larry Spears will be next week here in this room at noon. And so I don't have an address, though, for the house where she's currently. Okay. Okay. Yes. That's a great idea. Did y'all hear that? Okay. That's a really great idea. Thank you, Melissa. Also, Sunday is our next membership class, and we have, I think, 9 people signed up, like 4 or 5 different little family units, so that's really encouraging. So be praying for that go smoothly and go well. Two different things. I got only one of them up there. This is one for you to be thinking and praying about for our missions and outreach. We've got that partnership with that ministry down in Honduras, and our next trip we're gearing up to or planning towards this fall in September, towards the end of September. And so be thinking and praying about if you would like to join us on that trip and want to know more about that. As we have more specific details moving forward, we'll let the church know. But be thinking and praying now. And then also, Phyllis Perkins is on her way to Hungary now. I don't know if she's in the air yet. Is she? Okay. Oh, the flight was at noon. Okay, I wasn't sure. Then she is in the air. So be praying for her for safe travels and that everything go well while she's over there and then she come back safely as well. So I don't think I have anything else announcements-wise, do I? Anything else big going on? So, okay, well, let's get into our lesson. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Look at us. We're flying through this letter. Not really, but we've got time. As we're turning there, I'm not going to do a full recap of everything we've covered, and especially as we go further into the letter, we'll just do kind of bigger picture recaps. But Paul is writing a letter to the Christians in Corinth, and we said Corinth was very metropolitan, cosmopolitan in all the best and worst ways. So we said to kind of modernize it a little bit. It's like a New York City, a Las Vegas, and an LA kind of mixed together. So they had a little bit of everything. And that was good in some ways and bad in a lot of ways as well. And the Christians in Corinth were a mix of people and backgrounds, and some of them had a Jewish background. A lot of them did not. So there were complexities that came with that and different relational dynamics and problems that they had. But also they lived in a society, this is what Paul starts touching on at the end of chapter 1, that really valued eloquence. They wanted to be impressed. They wanted to be entertained. And so the gospel to a lot of their society was foolish. It was stupid. It wasn't impressive. It was contrary to what they would want or expect from a God or from a religion. And so their surrounding culture and society looked down upon this new Christian movement. And those that came from a Jewish background or were dealing with a Jewish community, they also had problems with it because they did not see Christ for who he was, and they were looking for a different kind of Messiah. But Paul said at the end of chapter 1 that it's because they were blind. They were looking for wisdom and power in earthly terms, worldly terms, personal human terms, and because of that, they missed out on the true wisdom of power that was on display through Christ and God's great plan. And Paul, as he's weaving all these different themes and ideas together, uses that to overlap but also segue into one of their major issues that they had in Corinth. What we're going to focus more specifically on tonight is divisions. They were very split amongst themselves for a whole lot of different reasons. Some of it was just kind of personal preference, which kind of leader, which speaker, which teacher they liked the most or were the most familiar with. Some liked Paul, some liked Peter, some liked Apollos, and so they were kind of divided amongst themselves that way. As we'll see later in the letter too, some of it they were divided based on, just very earthly human terms, just social standing and status, so wealth and not wealth. And then within the community as well, they were divided over spiritual gifts and the use of those gifts and many other things like that. And so Paul, first, pastorally, but kind of soberingly, humbled them and reminded them that you weren't impressive to begin with, so let's not get on our high horse now that you've been brought into the life of God with the family of God, and you've been given the gifts of the Spirit on display in many ways, and you've been given the wisdom of God and the power and the mind of Christ, as we talked about. The Spirit is active amongst you, but don't think that makes you special in the sense that you should elevate yourselves against others. You should be grateful and open and enjoy the life that God has brought you into, but don't pit yourselves against each other or elevate yourselves above each other, because that's going to cause more and more problems. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight. So in chapter 2, Paul reminds them what he's about, even though it may not look impressive to the rest of the world or even to some of them. He's not looking to be impressive or influential or powerful. He just really, really wants them to know Jesus and everything that goes into that. That's his thing. And so if you get Jesus, that's what he's happy about. If you don't think he's cool, that's fine, as long as you understand who Jesus is and what it means to belong to him. And then last week we talked about, he pushed further this idea that Christians and non-Christians are divided, not just in terms of salvation, but in terms of seeing what God is up to, because those who have turned to Christ in faith have been given the Spirit of God, and now they have access to God's heart and God's mind. They've been brought into God's great plans for life through Jesus. And those on the outside cannot see that. So it's not just that they're opposed to God, it's that they now have no idea really what God is up to, and they're really on their own to do the best that they can in this life and in the life to come. But those who belong to Jesus have been given the Spirit and have access to walk in the ways of God, and can see things the way that God sees things. And so they are spiritual in that sense rather than earthly or worldly. So not just thinking about what's right in front of them or what they can do. They have been opened up to the wisdom of God and the beauty and the power of the gospel and life in God's kingdom, that kind of thing. And so the difference there, again, was between those who have turned to Christ in faith and now see the gospel for what it is, the wisdom and power of God, and then life with God through the Spirit, as opposed to those who have not and do not have those things or see those things. But now, Paul's going to narrow his focus, and the comparison or the contrast is going to be within the house of God, amongst those who are Christians and on the same team in that sense, but have pitted themselves against each other. And because of that, a distinction has arisen. Not in their mind. In their mind, they thought, I'm smarter or better than you. But Paul is saying it's actually an issue of maturity. Some of you are mature, but a whole lot of you are wildly immature. And so we're going to talk about that, starting in verses 1 through 4. So this is the first big topic of one of their major issues. And so if someone could read for us chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Okay, thank you. So again, Paul had been talking about good things and really encouraging and lifting them up, that you have the wisdom of God and you get to see and walk spiritually with God and see what He's up to and see what He likes and what He doesn't and where all things are going. These are wonderful blessings and advantages that they have. But then he stings them in chapter 3, verse 1. But he's saying, but I can't really talk to you about these things, and this is my modern day paraphrase, because you're a bunch of babies. And so let's talk about what that means and what that looks like. Generally speaking, and we can make a list here, how do you know, how can we tell if someone is mature, just in life? We'll talk about the spiritual life second, but just generally speaking, as we're out existing in this life together on this planet, how can we tell that someone's mature? Like what characteristics do they have? Okay. Okay. That's not wrong. Okay. She said they wrinkle. Okay, so that's a physical sign, but that counts. Let's go a little deeper. Means they've been around a while, so they have some experience. Is a nice way we might say that. Okay, yeah. Okay, experience. Okay, they tend to make educated decisions. Okay, they show wisdom. What were you saying? Okay. Yeah, because just because someone has lived a long time does not necessarily mean that they're wise. They could have been making mistakes for a whole long time, right? Okay. What else? Can you give me some other things that we can point to? We're like, okay, that person has some wisdom, or that person has some maturity. We'll go. What'd you say? The way they talk. What does that mean? Like, what about how they talk? The way they communicate, but how? Do what? Oh. So how they talk. So give me an example of someone who's mature. How does a mature person communicate as opposed to an immature person? Do what? They can be calm. Okay. How else do we know? They can be objective. Okay. What else? They listen. Okay, so they actually listen. That's very, very key. Caroline, what were you saying? Yes. You remember when we covered James, slow to speak, quick to listen? I think that's backwards, but you get the idea. Yeah, thoughtful, considerate, okay. Calm, objective. What are some other telltale signs that someone's mature? Responsible. Thank you. Good. So not reckless. So this can be responsible in many ways. Like if they have job duties, they do the work that they're supposed to do with their money. They're wise and responsible. They're not reckless, or how they handle their business or their family. Can you think of any other signs that someone is mature? We're going to get to that. So we're not talking Christianity just yet. This is just folks, just generally. But yeah, that's a really good one we're going to get to in a second. When something bad happens, go. What were you going to say? High morality? Okay. When something doesn't go their way, how does an immature person respond? They throw. Yeah, knowing right from wrong is very, very key. Yeah, we'll say that. Okay. Right and wrong. Yeah, slow to anger now. We're cooking. That counts. These all kind of overlap, don't they? But yeah, so when a mature person runs into a situation that is less than ideal, they don't panic. They don't throw a fit. They don't lash out, right? They act like a grown-up, we say. Right? So we get some of these things. So we can recognize, Christian or non-Christian, there are some general characteristics. Even if it's harder to articulate, we can usually point to it and tell someone who's mature or not. And we said it's not just about life experience, even though that often helps. It's not just about age. That often should help. And it's not just about being in a position where we would want them to be mature, because we know Politics is a good example, but there's so many leaders in our world today, in our country today, who are in positions of power and influence who are wildly immature. So they might be skilled, good at what they do from a job standpoint, but emotionally, they're big babies and they throw fits and they throw tantrums, right? Okay, so more specifically for what we're talking about here, and Ronnie already mentioned one, how can we tell when someone, a Christian, is spiritually mature? A lot of that's going to be the same, but let's be even more focused. What did you say about the word? I think you said they're deep in the word. Okay. So deep in God's word. So like knowledgeable, but also take it to heart, also seek to live it out. Okay. How else can we tell that someone's spiritually mature? Okay. Okay, by their actions. Can you give me an example of mature actions? Okay, yeah. So, slow to speak, slow to anger. Oh, they pray. Good. Do what? Active prayer life. Pray actively. This is good. How else can we identify someone who's mature spiritually? Do what? They seek to serve? Okay. Huh? Okay. Okay. So we'll say kind, because that's different, I think, and deeper than being polite. We live in the South. A lot of us can be polite, but we're real nasty behind the scenes. Kindness is different. We'll go Steve and then Doug. Worry-free. Worry-free? Okay. Or at least when they are worried, they know how to keep it in perspective. Doug, what were you going to say? They love others? Okay. This is good. We're getting somewhere. And Melissa, you said, oh, I already had that. That goes with service. Want to serve, want to notice others and what they're going through. Aren't self-centered or self-focused. Again, we're going to talk about this. We'll touch on it tonight. We'll touch on it all throughout the letter. But there are a lot of folks who I'm not doubting their salvation. I can speak for myself at different stages of my life, where I was a Christian and I was in positions of leadership, but I needed to grow up a lot. I was spiritually immature. And that showed up in a lot of different ways. And so just because someone's in a position of responsibility or leadership does not guarantee that they're going to be wise or discerning or mature. And also, if they're just because they're skilled, we've seen that. We'll talk about that tonight. Just because someone is really gifted or skilled in some way, even if someone has a clear gift of the Spirit that you can point to and say, "There's the hand of God is on that person working through them," that in and of itself does not automatically guarantee that they're walking with the Spirit or that they're emotionally, mentally, or spiritually mature. And so Paul is not going into the depth here that we're going tonight. I'm just trying to help us, as I often do, ask us questions that seem silly or stupid, but help us articulate what it is that we feel but may not have words for, so that when we leave this room and we go out into the world and our lives with each other and lives with others, we can articulate and navigate these things more effectively, more faithfully. Again, we've all been, I think, in church spaces, since we're talking about the household of God, where we didn't quite have words for it, but someone in that church or someone in that Christian community was off, and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. And since we couldn't quite figure out what it was, we didn't know what to do about it on our end. And again, depending on who it is, especially if they're in a position of leadership or authority or influence, if something's off, but we don't know how to articulate it and we don't know how to respond to it, then that can lead to a whole lot of damage for a whole lot of people. So we want to be mindful of these things and thinking through them. But let's focus more here on what Paul's talking about. So Paul calls out the Christians in Corinth who belonged to Jesus. He's not doubting their salvation, because again, it wasn't about them being impressive or earning it in the first place. It's about the goodness and the grace of God. They had seen Jesus for who he was. The gospel, they received it, they put their faith in him, and they had even been given the gift of the Spirit. And they were displaying the gifts of the Spirit in some really powerful ways. But at the same time, he says, but you're like babies. I can't talk to you in the deep things of God or about the deep things of God because you're just not there. You don't have the capacity, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to understand and operate on these levels because you're still spiritual infants. And the big issue there is even though, again, they had been brought into the life of the Spirit, they had full access to the Spirit of God, what does Paul call them? He says, you're infants, but also you're walking in the flesh. You are fleshly. And what was, in their case, in this instance, the clearest sign that they weren't walking in the Spirit, that they were incredibly immature? What does Paul identify? Verse 3. Do what? Yes. Let's talk about that. Jealousy and quarreling. Oh, I think I'm spelling that wrong, but you get the idea. Are there two L's in quarrel? Is it right? Okay. Ooh, and my translation says strife, but we get the idea. So, let's try to identify and articulate what's wrong, what's problematic with jealousy and quarreling. What issues does that create? Division. Good. What else? So it separates and then keeps people apart. Okay. So wanting things that aren't yours. So we'll say wanting things. There's nothing wrong with wanting things, but it can get to an unhealthy level when it gets between us, or we're frustrated, or we're angry, or we're nasty, or we're fighting, right? So it pits us at odds. So it doesn't just divide us out. It pits us against each other. What other? We'll just work with feelings, emotions, attitudes. When this shows up, what comes with it? What are the cousins, the best friends of jealousy? Ill will? Yeah, absolutely. What else? Anger. Absolutely. What else? Pride. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that works with pride too. He says a caste system where some are better than others. And if you recognize that if I'm wanting things that aren't mine, whether it's something that someone has or a position they have or whatever it might be, I want their life with ill will, or I'm angry or I'm frustrated. I can get bitter on my end, which just destroys me. I can lash out at them, which tries to hurt them. We see how it continues to just compound and get worse and worse and worse. It's especially bad for Christians because it's working against the gospel. Ephesians chapter 2, if you remember, Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he talks about the great things that Christ has done, that God has done through the gospel, right? And in particular, in chapter 2, he starts talking about how Christ has torn down what? The wall of hostility that was between people. And so he thought he was there speaking big picture terms, Jews and Gentiles, but it applies to any interpersonal relationship, either individually or amongst groups of people. God, through Christ, has torn down anything and everything that would separate us, not just from him. That's a big part of it, the first part of it. But then secondly, related to that would separate us from each other. And in Christ, this is Ephesians 2 language, in Christ he has brought them together and made them one person. Later we'll talk about here, one body. So what God is doing through Christ to bring people together in fellowship and unity, to connect them to each other, to restore healthy, meaningful relationships like he had designed for them from the very beginning, Genesis 1 and 2. When they're immature and they're acting jealously, or when they're fighting and quarreling and bickering over things, that's not just making their lives miserable, it's actively opposing God's plans for the gospel. God says, I have brought you together and now you are dividing yourselves out. That's a problem, right? So Paul, as we'll see, is always working on these two levels. So the personal, human-to-human level, which is always a reflection of the vertical human-to-God level. So I might be, this is not true, it's an example, I might be real mad at Melissa, and she and I are fighting, and we're bickering and quarreling, and it's petty, and y'all all know it, and it's kind of annoying to be around us because we're always talking about each other. We've been in church circles like that, right? Just get over it, or make up, or just sit somewhere else. I don't know. You're being like children. So that makes it miserable for us, makes it miserable for anyone who has to be around us or deal with us. But we often stop there and think it's just, people issues. Paul's saying, oh, no, it's not people issues. When you act that way, you're opposing God and his designs for your life in the community of his people. So grow up is what he's saying. Grow up. You're being babies, and you're stuck there. I think that's the issue. Let's think about it this way. Is there anything wrong? My daughter turns 2 Saturday, so she's not an infant. She's a toddler, and she's still kind of in big picture, baby stage. Is there anything wrong with her doing what 2-year-olds do? She can't fully talk yet. She surely can't drive. I can't get her to get a job yet and really provide for herself or alleviate any of our, pressures. She wears a diaper. She needs us for everything. Oh my gosh. That doesn't bother us. Why? Because that's just part of being 2. Now, if she continues to be this way when she's 15, 16, 20, 30, 40, where I still have to do everything for her, still, can't provide, can't do anything, can't talk, that's problematic, right? That was a stage. We recognize it, but you're going to grow up and you're going to mature, not just physically, but the hope and the plan is emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you are going to grow. So some things that are okay when she's 2 that we're going to work with are going to be problematic and then even wrong and dangerous when she's 15 or 30, right? So the problem with the Corinthian Christians isn't that they started as babies in the faith. That's all of us. And especially for a lot of them that didn't have a Jewish background, it was all new to them. Everything was brand new. That's okay. God knows, and he works with where you are to then bring you and draw you forward deeper and deeper into the good news of the gospel, deeper and deeper into his kingdom in a relationship with him. So their issue wasn't that they had started immature, it's that they had stayed immature. And they had shown no signs or any desire to grow beyond that. As we'll see later in the letter, part of it was ignorance. They just didn't know better. A big part of it, though, was arrogance. They thought they had arrived. They thought they had everything they needed. I got the power of the Holy Spirit. I'm speaking in tongues. I'm healing. I got visions. I'm speaking prophetically. clear displays of God's power in us and through us, so we must be fine. And Paul says, no, you are not fine. As a matter of fact, you are so unfine that I can't even talk to you the way that you need to be talked to because you can't even handle it yet. We got some work to do, is what he's telling them here. Does that make sense so far? So, small scale, what's the issue, kind of just local level, small scale? What was the problem? And we know what their problem was, how it played out, but why does it matter? Why can't Paul just look, they're saved. They're going to heaven. Why does it matter? Why does he spend time dealing with this and calling this out and trying to walk them through it? Gets in the way of the gospel. They won't be productive. Yeah, together, right? And so we see on really cascading levels, individually, personally, it stunts their growth. They don't get to, we're not even talking punitive, discipline yet. We're talking about their own enjoyment of God, their knowledge of Christ and life in the Spirit and the blessings of walking in a good relationship with God. They're going to miss out on because they think they've arrived or because they're so distracted or because they're so immature. If they stay this deep forever, yes, they still are connected to God, and technically they would still go to heaven, but they're missing out on so much more that he has for them, right? Personally, they're missing out. But then interpersonally, the church isn't going to be what it's designed to be. It's not going to be a blessing for them. It's going to be miserable. And we know, again, as human beings who live with other human beings, sometimes, going back to the earlier example, if 2 people have a problem, even if it's not my problem, but I'm around them a lot, it kind of becomes my problem, right? We can sense it. Children, even if they don't have words for it, they can sense when mom and dad are fighting, right? They don't know. It's just the air is different, right? So in the Christian community, if people aren't getting along, if they're bickering, if they're fighting, if they're quarreling, if they're jealous, if they're divided, that then impacts everyone. It brings everyone down. It limits everyone's knowledge and growth and enjoyment and worship of God, right? So individually, they're missing out on the fullness of life with God. Corporately, as a community of Christians, they're missing out on the fullness of life with God. But then as Carol Ann was saying too, externally, the watching world all around them, it's killing their witness, right? And we've known and seen that in our own lives or in our own churches before. If you look at someone, it's like, hey, you should come to my church, but like all you've ever really seen of their church or heard them say about their church is people fighting over who knows what, anything. I mean, it's always something else, right? I'm not interested in going there. Or if they have nasty, argumentative, like aggressive leaders or pastors, like I don't want to deal with that. Again, I'm not in a position to judge their hearts and their salvation, but I'm going to say their fellowship's not something I want to be a part of. And so if you're not a Christian and they're trying to tell you all about how great Jesus is, but then you look at their life with Jesus and it looks either the same as yours or like more boring, less fun, and more like anxious than yours, you're not going to want to be a part of that. And so again, on all these different levels, Paul's saying this is where you're at, and it is highly problematic. You're missing out yourself, your community, and then the watching world's not getting a full picture or a true picture of what God is doing through Christ. So, stop. Grow up. There's so much at stake here. And then he focuses the attention in one particular direction that was causing a lot of jealousy and quarreling, and that comes in verses 5 through 9. So, Sue, you read so beautifully earlier. Do you mind reading verses 5 through 9? Okay, thank you. So, they had divisions amongst themselves. They were fighting, they were quarreling, which was an overflow of their spiritual immaturity, just one aspect of it. And so Paul kind of rides that theme, that idea. And part of their rivalry and the divisions they had, as we had mentioned in chapter 1, is they had different leaders that they liked and preferred. And it had gotten to the point, it wasn't just preference, like, oh, I really like how he preaches more than him. I mean, that's one thing. That's not the end of the world. But it started getting so deep and divided that they were associating themselves more with one leader as opposed to another. I'm not even going to listen to that guy. I don't really care about that guy. And if you're associated with him, I don't really care about you or have to listen to you either. And it was getting deeper and deeper and more problematic. So Paul, as part of his way of telling them to grow up, I'm going to help you see things better and see things for the way they are, and the role and the place that human leaders have in God's family. So how he refers to himself and Apollos, which was another key leader in the community, is really key. What does he call them? Servants. What does that mean? Why does that matter? What does that indicate? It's not about them, right? You have elevated us, and we're not blessed by it. We're not grateful for it. If you listen, if you love, if you support us, wonderful. But if you divide amongst yourselves based on us, that does no one any good. We don't want that. We don't view ourselves that way. We view ourselves as servants. We work for somebody else, right? We belong to the king, just like you, and so. They're not in charge. It's not their show. They're not running things. They shouldn't be the focus. You should not divide into different camps based on them. That, again, indicates that you've missed the point entirely. They're workers, and they have a job to do. Now, that does not mean that they are going to be servants in the exact same way, and it doesn't mean that they are interchangeable, replaceable one with the other. Paul had his strengths and surely his personality. Apollos had his strengths and his gifts and his personality. They were different, and they could be used in different ways, as Paul mentions here. But the bottom line is they served a purpose larger than themselves. Paul's view of ministry, again, chapter 2, isn't what Paul can do, what Paul likes to do, what Paul is even gifted to do. He says primarily what I'm all about is Jesus. I'm going to do everything I can with what I've been given by God and what circumstances I've been given in this life to point you to Jesus. Use all my gifts, all my skills, all my energy to point you to Jesus. Apollos, similarly, has the same purpose, but might have different skills or a different situation, right? So we can see their differences. They're not the same guy, and that's okay because they're moving in the same direction, and that's what he wanted them to see. Paul uses some agricultural imagery here in verse 6. Look at verse 6. What does he say he does? His role as a servant was to what? And Apollos' role as a servant was to what? Okay. So Paul planted, and Apollos, he watered. So before we get to the spiritual meaning here, generally speaking, if you're a farmer or a gardener, what's the difference between these two acts? Timing? Okay. So talk to me about the timing. Which one comes first? Okay. So this is where we start. You plant the seed, and then this comes afterward and helps nourish and encourage the growth of the seed, right? So spiritually speaking, what is Paul indicating in the life of the Christians in Corinth? What did he do? Right. He was the first missionary there. He brought the gospel to them. He planted the seed of the gospel in their life, their first converts, that kind of thing. But then he didn't stay around. Missionary journeys, this is an Acts, right? He moved on. And as we said weeks ago, when he was writing this letter, he doesn't even know all the Christians there at this point. He hadn't met all of them, seen them all face. He knew some of them, and he had heard there had been some correspondence, but he was a missionary. He was a church planter, literally and figuratively. And so he got them started, which is really important, right? Absolutely. So then what was Apollos' job? To pastor, to come alongside, to come after, to nurture, to strengthen, to encourage, to nourish that little plant, the church, the faith, so that it might continue to grow. So are they at odds? They're different, but they're working together. You need both of them, is what he's trying to help them see. But then the best part of all, and we all know this, whether you're a Christian or not, the farmer knows this, the gardener knows this. You can work your tail off to get the garden ready, to plant all the seeds, to water it, to treat it just right. But is there anything in your human power or ability that makes that plant grow? No. You got to trust the system, trust a higher power, trust the design of the universe. Ultimately, you got to trust God. He's the one who makes it grow. So Paul is needed. Apollos is needed. They're not at odds. They work together, but they both recognize, and the Corinthian Christians needed to recognize, that it wasn't ultimately about them anyway. It's ultimately about what God was doing. Look again at verse 6. This is really key. So verse 5, what's Apollos? What's Paul? How are we special? We're servants. Verse 5, I mean. We're servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. So servants, through whom you believed, as God assigned, right? So he's saying, I want you to see things the way that we see things, your leaders see things, the way that God designed things to work. We're not kings here. We're not looking to set up followings. We want you to know Jesus and to follow him. Your faith isn't ultimately because of us. Paul, I did not save you. Apollos did not save you. But through our ministry, through my planting, through his watering, through our presentation of the gospel, our evangelism, our teaching and preaching, through our ministry, God was at work bringing you into the life of faith. And so, again, he's not being falsely humble. He's trying to put things in the proper perspective. Paul and Apollos are important, that they were needed, but ultimately it's about what God was doing through them. Verse 8, he says that they are one. What do you think that means? They're united in the Spirit. They're the same team, right? Same team. In basketball life, and I'm not super skilled at basketball, but I played enough basketball. Richard, in basketball, or you guys, I think you play basketball. Chance, don't you play basketball? When two guys on the same team are going for a rebound and they don't see each other because they're looking at the ball, if they don't communicate, or if their teammates don't communicate, they can unnecessarily fight each other and both lose the rebound, right? But sometimes if two guys on the same team who don't realize they're on the same team are going for the same ball, someone on the team or the coach or someone might yell out, "Same!" Meaning you're all on the same team. You're working together. You don't got to fight each other. You want the same goal, so work together. That's what Paul is telling the Corinthian Christians here. We're on the same team. We're moving in the same direction. We have the same goals. We have different skills. We have different settings. Apollos, I don't know if he was even still there at that point or if he was itinerant. Paul's in and out as a missionary, but you need to recognize ultimately we're on the same team. You need to understand we're all on the same team. We're moving in the same direction. We have the same goal, the same overarching focus. What was their overarching focus? What was their one goal, their one main purpose together? Yeah, pointing people to Jesus and then raising them up. So bringing them into the kingdom, pointing them to the kingdom through faith in Jesus Christ, and then strengthening and edifying them to live life in the kingdom. So again, they're pointing beyond themselves to life with God in God's kingdom. So again, leaders are important. They are needed. They have different skills. God uses them in different times and places differently. They're accountable to God, Paul says here. But ultimately, we work for God. God is at work. That's the big point. That's what you need to see, and that's what you need to be involved in. So no human leader, as important as they are, should get bigger than God. And I know that sounds silly when we say it out loud like that, like, well, duh. But the reality is, it's really easy to miss that point when you're in leadership, or if you're in a church and you really like your leader. So you don't even have to have, malicious intent. It's really easy to get distracted by people you like and be overly supportive. But my dad, years ago, when I first started in ministry, he told me a piece of advice that I have never forgotten. And it sounded really harsh initially, but then I quickly realized just how helpful and profound and wise it is. He said, you need to always remember that God was at work long before you, and he's going to be at work long after you. It's not about you. Work hard, be faithful, but this is God's show. And I remember thinking, okay. But then the more and more I got into ministry, the more and more I have to remind myself that this is God's show. He was here before me. He's going to be here after me. And so ultimately, what the church needs isn't me. This church doesn't ultimately need me. I do hope you like me. I'm going to work hard and be faithful here, and I think God's called us to a lot of great things together. But ultimately, you could replace me with someone else and probably be fine, if not better. But if we miss out on what God is doing, if we are blind and hardened to the movement of His Spirit, it doesn't matter what human leader you have here, you're going to be missing it, right? So that's what He's trying to help them see. The dangerous thing is, because of their immaturity, which worked in tandem with their arrogance, they missed it. They didn't see it. And so their life and their experience of the faith and then their witness to the faith ended up being really, really, really shallow. And so they were missing out because they had the gifts of God. He was still at work despite them, but they were missing out on the fullness of what life with Him could be like and then what their witness could be like to the watching world because they had been distracted. And they had been then divided because of these distractions in good things, right? Okay. Let me close with a couple of different thoughts here. I think one thing that this points to, and we're going to see this showing up all throughout the letter because it's just part of discipleship, Paul makes it really clear here, as we've talked about before in our church, the point isn't just becoming a Christian. The point is then being a Christian. So the ongoing life and journey of discipleship. Not just meeting Jesus, meeting Him as the first step, but then walking with Him and trusting Him more and more and enjoying Him and worshiping Him and obeying Him more and more and more, right? You got to grow up. You got to grow up. And so it's not just because you've been brought into the family, you've been given these great blessings for eternity, but even here and now. But what are you going to do with it? Are you going to grow? Are you going to mature? Are you going to understand them? Are you going to love and serve Are you going to build each other up? These are the deeper things of the faith that the Corinthian Christians were missing, that so many of us can miss today. So something that we talk about as a staff and as leadership here at our church is, like on a given Sunday morning, there's more to the life of our church than Sunday morning, but Sunday morning is a good kind of like case point to point at. On a given Sunday morning, Nathan and the worship team are going to work really, really hard to do well at what we've asked them to do. All right, we want their music to be good, to be engaging, to sound good, to not be bad, to get people singing and connected. My sermons, I work really, really hard to preach well, to be engaging and persuasive, all these kind of things. But if that's all that anybody gets, the worship's good, the sermons are interesting. Man, have we missed it, right? We've done y'all a disservice and the watching world a disservice if that's all it is, because there are other things in life that are more exciting or more engaging or more interesting or what, more fun or whatever. But if we recognize that worship through music and through the preached word is important, but not all there is, that there's more, bigger and deeper and wider to the life of faith, the life of discipleship, and that's where our church is heading, that's what we're looking for. That's what we want to be involved in. That's how we're tracking success, if you will. Not just how many people show up on a given Sunday, which is good, again, don't get me wrong, but how many people don't just stop at coming on a Sunday, but we can see in their life, because we're part of their life, they're growing and trusting God more and obeying God more and serving God more and these kind of things. So, all that to say, life in the Spirit isn't transactional. It's not just, I became a Christian, I'm going to heaven, I might have some fun before I get there. No, each and every day. Are you growing? Are you maturing? Through the ups and downs and twists and turns of life, is it evident that your life isn't at a standstill waiting to be beamed up to heaven, but that it's actually on the move, that there's a trajectory here, that you're getting closer and closer to God, more and more like Christ as you go. Does that make sense? All right, let me close with this one thing. I want us to brainstorm again together. What are some ways that the Corinthians, were missing it, but what are some ways that we can help ourselves as a church community, as a community of faith, not get in the position that they were in? So what are some practical ways, tangible ways, that we can help ourselves and each other grow in maturity, or guard against jealousy and division, or walk in the Spirit? Can you give me some examples? Bible study, okay. So yes, knowing and studying God's Word. What else helps us? Okay. So sharing our faith. And we'll say, this is both in word and deed. Okay. What else? What are some other ways that we can? Ooh. Oh, good. So mentoring. We'll put accountability as well. For my generation in particular, and my generation is getting older and older, obviously, but I heard this, 5 or 10 years ago. Someone said that the big issue with my generation at the time, millennials, was that they were desperate for community. They needed connections as human beings, right? Don't we all? They were desperate for community, but they didn't want accountability. So they wanted a community on their terms. And so what ended up happening was their community was this deep, because it was just not just social media that didn't help, but we didn't know truly how to live life together. We could be around each other. We wanted to be around each other, but there was no depth, there was no growth, because there was no mentoring, there was no accountability. Right? And so absolutely. Now, we want to make sure this is healthy and done well, but recognizing that we're in this together, we're accountable to each other and with each other is very, very key. Also, I love this. This idea of, again, just because you become a Christian doesn't mean you automatically know everything or know how to do everything. And especially, I was talking to, he's younger than me. He's not technically a young Christian anymore, but a young man who's a member of our church who has been given some good spiritual gifts. There's talent, there's skill there that could be useful in God's kingdom, as tacky as that sounds. But I recognize he has no idea what to do with it. And so my job as his pastor, or just as a godly friend in his life who loves him, isn't to say, good luck, hope it works out, either at our church or somewhere else. My job is to, who can we put around you that can help you? If it's me, let me walk and talk and tell you the things that I learned from older, wiser Christians in my life, right? That helps us not be so individualized or even competitive, but work together. Good. Can you think of anything else? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Try to put others first. Say, be humble. That helps. That's hard, but it helps.
We don't seem to be competitive individuals, and I'm not careful what turn it into a spiritual contest.
Yeah. So are there any steps we can take to make sure we don't move in that direction where things get competitive or like a spiritual contest? Okay. Mm-hmm. Staying humble. Good. Can you think of anything else that helps us be unified? Good. Pray together. Uh-huh. Pray together. Fellowship. I'm going to add 2 more and then we'll close. Serve each other. Like truly. Be watching for opportunities to bless someone else, to take care of them, to help them, to provide for them, because that can play out in any numbers of ways, right? But that's part of putting others first and being humble. How can I help you? How can I be a blessing? How can I serve you in some way? But even more specifically, sacrifice for others. This is what? Do what? Washing a lot of feet. So humbling ourselves to serve others, even if it's things we don't want to do or that we may not like to do, but sacrificing for others, because that's what Christ has done for us. That's what makes a difference. A lot of people, this will be my closing comment, Paul talks about this in this letter and elsewhere, it's really easy, Jesus talked about this, it's really easy to love the people who love you, to love the people that you like or who like you, to be good to those that you want something from, right? It's a whole lot harder and a whole lot more important and makes a whole lot bigger of an impact when we love and serve and sacrifice for others that we may not like or that we may be opposed to or may disagree with or can do nothing for us. But for some reason, somehow, God is at work powerfully when we do that. And so that's not just good for the glory of God, because that's what He likes, but for us, it blesses us as a people. So finding ways that we can love and serve and sacrifice for each other draws us together, blesses us, and then bears witness to the world. Okay. Again, on a Wednesday night in this room, these all sound great, and we agree and we like it, but then actually walking it out and then living it out is much harder. But the good news is we have each other to work through this together with, and we do have the Spirit of God as we humble ourselves and pray and ask for His leadership. And the also good news, when we get it wrong, when we goof up, whether it's Paul or whoever it might be, calls us out, hey, grow up, you're missing it, we have an opportunity there to turn around, to confess, to repent, to apologize, and then get moving forward in the right way rather than doubling down and staying stuck. God is a God of growth. God is a God of life. And so when we feel stuck or if we're not growing or moving in the right direction, the answer is always to let go of that and turn to God so He can get us moving again. Okay. That was plenty for tonight. Any other comments or questions on any of this? Okay. Well, let's look at our prayer list then. Does anyone need one that doesn't have one?